So welcome everybody. For those of you who were here last week for the first webinar, welcome back. And today we're going to be covering ways to cope with change, attitudes about change, and going through all of those things. My name is Ashlee Hollinger. I am a counseling therapist and art therapist with the Breelove Counselling team. And like I said, just if you just popped in or didn't get a chance to already, if you want to grab something to write on, that would be really helpful. All right. So just to recap, this presentation is being put on by Breelove Counselling in partnership with the Canadian Mental Health Association of New Brunswick. Just to give a quick background, Breelove Counselling uses a trauma-informed approach. We operate an integrative practice that focuses on community and private partnerships. Our specialties range from general mental health, art therapy, adversities, trauma, nutritional psychology, all for individuals aged 18 or older. Our focus is to help individuals build resilience and to heal. And we achieve this by exploring opportunities for wellness and empowerment in non-judgmental listening and customized treatment plans. So our focus is also a central part of our commitment to working with first responders, including healthcare workers, and bringing awareness and practice of vicarious resilience to help manage vicarious trauma and building trauma-informed organizations. So Breelove Counselling contributes to the efforts of a resilient community. And since 2012, we have focused on services that support and empower wellness, awareness, and resilience. So our community contribution is through our practicum placement program, so the community counseling program, which is in partnership with the Canadian Mental Health Association of New Brunswick in our Moncton office. And the program offers free counseling therapy for those in need by appointment, including our counseling clinic, which takes place on Wednesday. So if anyone feels that they could benefit from further support in terms of counseling, that would be a great option to explore. And you can always ask for information on that if you need it. There is a Canadian Mental Health Association in St. John, I believe. In terms of Breelove Counselling, though, we are centrally located in in Moncton. But yet we do offer right now with COVID and everything, we are offering our services through telehealth, so either video, phone, or chat messaging options, and that's available for all New Brunswickers. So if you are interested in that option, again, you can always send us an email or we can chat afterwards if you're interested in that as well. So for those of you who just popped in, just to let you know, my name is Ashlee, and I'll be here today kind of facilitating this webinar. I would suggest grabbing a piece of paper and a pencil just so you have something to write, as we're going to go through a couple of different surveys and just little activities that it would be helpful to write stuff down in. So that's
Ashlee.
Yes.
Hi, sorry to interrupt. Just talked to Jordan. She said she sent all the registrants a follow-up email after last week's session.
Okay.
That has the links to the Google Docs.
Perfect.
For last week and for this week's sessions. She's just sending me right now, and I'll put it in the chat as soon as I get it. The link again, though, in case anybody missed that email.
Perfect.
They can just click on the link and open those documents right away. And I do notice Cynthia Perry does have her hand up. Cynthia, if you can type your question in the chat, you can send it privately just to panelists, and that way it'll show up just to Ashlee if you need to.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. So like Angela just said, if you haven't received the workbook that will accompany this presentation, it will be sent to you. It will put it in the chat, or it's in your email somewhere. You don't necessarily need it for today. It can be helpful if you want to follow along, because all the stuff that we're going to go through is in there, but it's not absolutely necessary, and we can just go through it together during the webinar, and you can kind of look at it afterwards as well. No problem, Cynthia, at all. But if you do have any questions, just kind of type those in the chat, and everybody. All right, so we will get started. So the first thing we're going to talk about is we're going to go through a little scale on ways to cope with change. So one of the best ways to deal with change in your life is to learn how to cope with it effectively. There are many different strategies for coping with change, and every individual will approach coping in a unique way. And may respond to or gravitate towards particular skills more than others. So there's not a one way of dealing with this, and some of the things that we go through or that you went through last week may resonate with you more than others, and some things you just might be like, that doesn't work for me, and that's okay. That's pretty normal. So we're going to go through the scale that talks about how to cope with change. So on the screen here, you will see the scale. So what you're going to do is you're going to look at the different little questions and you're going to scale yourself in terms of true, somewhat true, or not true. So you're just going to circle or write down the number that associates with the true, somewhat true, or not true. So if I'm able to confront my mistaken beliefs. So if this is true, you're going to mark that as a 3. Like I said, if you have the link for the workbook and you want to follow along that way, you definitely can do that, but we can just do it together here as well. So this scale will assess your coping skills and help you better understand how effective you are in preventing and coping with change. So when you read through the different statements, read through them carefully and respond by choosing, again, what fits for you. So the true, somewhat true, or not true. And keep in mind that it's not a test. There's no really wrong answer. It's just to kind of see where we're at. And again, there's no wrong answers for this. It is what it is. So I'm going to give us some time. I'll go through some of the different options and we'll just read through them together. And you guys can score on your own as we go through. All right. So in dealing with change in my life, I am able to confront my mistaken beliefs. So true, somewhat true, not true. I find it difficult to stop and or correct my self-talk. So true, somewhat true, not true. I know how to monitor my negative self-talk. I sometimes question my worth as a human being. I can alter my expectations to match the changes that are occurring. I have many pessimistic thoughts. I often say things like, I can't change. I can see the opportunities in a situation. Now jumping down to the same page on the bottom. I often have a hard time coping. I exercise and keep physically fit. I manage my stress well. I waver on the meaning and purpose in my life. I look to my religious and or spiritual beliefs for comfort. I find it hard to get rest or enough sleep. I visualize reducing stress and anxiety. And by visualize, I believe that means you kind of focus on, okay, I'm gonna relieve my stress. I'm gonna relieve my anxiety. It's kind of like you're talking to yourself or visualizing the stress leaving your body. I believe that's what that part means. I use relaxation techniques to relax my body. So now moving over to the top right-hand side, we have, I have an adequate support system to help manage my stress. I take care of myself and my personal needs. I try to nurture myself when I feel anxious. I lose sight of my self-esteem. I am overly sensitive to critical statements from others. I do not try to live up to the expectations of others. I am not comfortable saying no in any situation. I am assertive in asking for what I want. And now jumping down to the last section. I often try to control things I cannot control. I focus on the things in my life I can do something about. I am action-oriented. I set new goals for myself and work towards them. I make rational, logical decisions. If one path does not work, I try another. I tend to give up easily. and I let go of things beyond my control. Okay. So as you can see, there is a place to total up for each little section there. So just total up those. And again, if you want to do this on your own later on, it is in the workbook that was sent out as well. So you can definitely do that. There's another section. So I have an adequate support system to help manage my stress. I take care of myself and my personal needs. I try to nurture myself when I feel anxious. I lose sight of my self-esteem. Well, I made a mistake, and this is already on the other page, so we already went through that. So I'm just going to skip through. Apologies about that one. Okay, so like I said, you're going to add up the numbers from each little section or set of questions that we had. So that first one that we did is it's the cognitive ability, so our ability to alter our negative thinking or see things more realistically, to be more optimistic during times of change. So that's what that first section of questions is assessing. We also have the next section would be the wellness total. So it's your ability to relax and manage stress during times of change. The next section was nurturance. So your ability to take care of yourself during times of change. And then that last section there was an action total. So your ability to set goals and take positive action and try and control only the things that you were able to control during times of change. So whatever you scored, if you scored high, so 19 to 24, it means that you tend to be pretty effective in coping with change in your life. Moderate is the 14 to 18 range, and that means that you have some skills in coping with change, but you could still use some work. And no matter where you score, anyone could benefit from kind of understanding how to cope with change and manage these things better. And then 8 to 13 range is lower and tends to suggest that you have maybe difficulties coping with change. So again, going through, when you add those up, you can kind of check where you're at. And again, no matter what, you can all benefit from working on this and strengthening and expanding your coping skills, which is why you're here for this webinar. So this is just a good little assessment to see where you're at, especially in particular, like if you find that for your cognitive total, that was really low, then maybe that means that in particular, you struggle with the thinking part of it, that your thoughts and your beliefs around change are really struggling. And that's where you maybe need to put in more work. Whereas if you really scored low on the nurturing part of things, maybe it means that I just need to focus on taking care of myself more during times of change. So these things and knowing your scores can actually help you understand maybe where work needs to be done and where you should focus your attention on in terms of being better at coping with change. So like I said, these are all in the workbook. So if you didn't get a chance to do that today and kind of get your scores done right now, you can do that later. Okay. So when we talk about those cognitive skills, like I said, how we speak to ourselves and the content of these thoughts have a large influence on how well we are able to cope with change. Strengthening these cognitive skills will not only help us to think more realistically and more balanced, but it can also positively impact our emotions and our behaviors. So our thoughts, our emotions, and our behaviors, we kind of look at that in a triangle, and they're very intricately connected. Our thoughts influence our behaviors and our emotions influence our thoughts and our behaviors influence our thoughts and our emotions. So they're all interconnected and they play on each other. So the way that we think about ourselves or talk to ourselves really does have an impact on our behaviors and how we feel towards ourselves. And we tend to, as human beings, have a negativity bias. So like I said, as human beings, we're predisposed to be alert to and pay attention to the negative. There was a study done that found that when the brain is at rest, so when you're just kind of hanging out and with yourself and with your thoughts, most often people will go to thinking the negative things, like whether it be self-critical talks, limiting beliefs, just thinking negatively about the world or other people. Like, we tend to focus on those negative things when we're at rest. And that can happen quite often. So it's almost a habitual pattern to fall into that negativity quite quickly. And this is actually an evolutionary process, a survival strategy that has ensured our survival as a species. So focusing on the negative can therefore be seen as our brain's attempt at keeping us safe, because when we're tuned into the negative, back in the day when there was more, I guess, of a physical threat to our well-being as a species, back when we were nomads and living in the wild, paying attention to the negative meant being primed to and connected to danger. Whereas now, as we've evolved as a species and we have much more at our fingertips, the negative and maybe the danger is actually our thoughts and the way that we think about ourselves, or the way people speak to us. Like, those kind of things are more quote unquote danger. So it is helpful in the sense that, again, it's a way for us to try and keep safe, but it also affects us in a negative way as well, and can actually be quite limiting if we don't challenge these things and kind of pay attention to them. So when it comes to life changes, it's really no different. Although our brains are hardwired to spot and cling to the negative, it is possible to retrain and refocus our thoughts onto more positive aspects of the situation in our lives. So by noticing the negative and intentionally redirecting our thoughts onto more helpful or adaptive ways of approaching change, we can begin to challenge the way that we view and approach our situations. So awareness is always the first step in change. That's what I always tell clients, is that the first part of making a change and taking those steps is to be aware of it. If you're not aware of the way that you speak to yourself, the way that you think about yourself, and just the maybe natural set point of your thoughts, then there's no way for you to change that, right? So we have to kind of tune in and listen to ourselves first to figure those things out. So if you think about the particular change or changes that you're going through presently, whether that be with COVID and everything going on with that, whether that be personal, work-related, family-related, relationships, like anything, any change that's happening. So think about the negative thoughts that go through your mind about these situations. Can you pinpoint what those are? And what are the positive thoughts that go through your mind about this situation? And if there is a positive thought, do you tend to follow that up with a "but this" question? So that's something to reflect on, maybe after the webinar, or even and just right now and sitting here. But just to reflect on, what are the thoughts that I have about the changes that are happening in my life? How am I thinking? How am I talking to myself about this change? And if I am speaking kind of negatively towards myself, can I recognize that and just be more aware of it as it's happening in the moment? So oftentimes our negative thinking patterns are not rooted in reality, and they may actually be distorted depending on the particular lens that you're looking at the change from. So for example, these thoughts might jump to conclusions and look to worst case scenarios. They may be all or nothing in nature. They may filter out alternative explanations or ignore other possibilities. These are all examples of cognitive distortions that we all tend to have. But if you recognize that, again, you can start to challenge that and be like, oh, well, it could end up good, right? If we go to that all or nothing where it's like, no, it's going to be terrible, could we also offer the explanation that maybe it is good? Maybe it goes well. Maybe the thing that we're afraid of isn't actually going to turn out as bad as we think it is when we think of the worst case scenario. So by expanding and looking at and becoming aware of the way that we think about change, we are more likely to be able to consider all of the resources that we have, and we can start to adopt a more balanced and helpful thought process around the changes that we're going through. So if you can respond to the following sentence starters, and you can kind of, what's the first thing that comes to mind? So I can decide to blank as soon as possible. I can reach out to for support. I can blank for my spirit. I can improve my attitude by, and I can relax by. So think about what the first things were that came to mind when I said those things. And if nothing came to mind, that's okay. But maybe that is something that you can start to reflect on more, right? What can you decide to do about this change that you have control over? Who can you reach out to for support to help you during this change? What can you do to support yourself and your mental well-being and your spirit during this time? How can you look at your own attitude and adjust maybe the way that you're thinking? And how can you help yourself relax, because change is very stressful? And how can you help your body kind of relax from that? Another way of challenging our negative thinking about change and its possible outcomes is to find a sense of hope. The belief that your life will continue going well or will eventually get better, especially in the face of big change and scary change nonetheless, is going to be really helpful. So developing a short-term goal or plans can help you have something to look forward to. So we use the acronym HOPE to talk about have a list of what you will look forward to in the next week. That's H. O is for opt, to have a wish list of things that you want to happen or want to accomplish within the next month. P is for plan, for what you'd like to happen in your life within a year. And then E is everything and everyone you would like to have in your life in the next 5 years. So sometimes when we're in the midst of change, and especially when it's a stressful change, we can forget, I guess, the big picture. We can forget that this is a temporary thing and we will make it out the other side. And we get caught up in maybe the short-term vision of that. And we get lost in the chaos and the discomfort and the feeling not grounded and feeling like everything's kind of moving around us. But if you can really kind of, again, tune in and nurture yourself or support yourself and kind of focus in on how can I make small goals or plan ahead for certain things that can maybe help me maybe see a bigger picture right now, because I'm having that maybe short-term vision. So planning for things to look forward to can include making time for fun activities. Engaging in these types of activities not only replenishes your energy, but can be a form of self-care that contributes positively to your overall wellness. So this is kind of tapping into that wellness bracket of things that we were talking about earlier. So when you're going through the ups and downs of change and that process, it is really important to give yourself permission to take a step back and to have some fun. When we're in the midst of change and we have a lot of stress around the change, it is really hard to be like, okay, I need to just pause, take a break from this, and I need to just do something for myself. That's the last thing that we think of. It's the last thing that we pay attention to, because when we're in the midst of change, finding a solution it's almost desperate in a sense. There's a lot of anxiety and kind of rushing towards that end point to get it figured out. But sometimes when that happens, it takes away from life and from living, and we get so stressed out that we're not able to plan ahead appropriately. We're not able to enjoy our lives because we're so stressed about what's going on. So some fun things that people might do to nurture themselves or to engage in some fun could be gardening, it could be dancing, doing crafts, watching a movie, taking an online yoga class, playing a board game with friends and family, doing some sort of handiwork or a project with your hands, going for a hike, right? So these are just some examples. I'm sure some of you have tons of other ideas of fun activities that you can do, and if you want to share them in the chat, please do. But wellness includes the whole person. It includes your mind and all. So without taking time to enjoy ourselves, even in the midst of change and uncertainty, we can easily find ourselves running on empty and on the way to burnout. So if you can think of what are some of the activities that you enjoy doing most? What has energized you and had you looking forward to engaging in the particular activity in the past? If it's hard to come up with a few examples, try to remember what you used to like doing as a kid. Sometimes that might sound silly, but at the same time, sometimes it's really helpful to look back on when you were the most joyous or just free and remember what you loved to do. because there's a lot of insight that we have as kids. Kids are just kind of naturally enjoying themselves and doing things that they love without having to think about it. So sometimes that can be really helpful to tune into what you like. Does anyone want to share an idea that they had in terms of an activity that would be helpful for them other than the ones that were listed up here? I will share personally. Something that always helps me feel better, especially when I'm feeling stressed and maybe some sense of overwhelm, is to just get outside. Nature can be really healing. And in particular, I love the ocean or some sort of water. So hearing the waves or running water in a river or anything like that is really soothing for me. So I know that when I'm feeling that sense of overwhelm or that kind of on the path to burnout, I tend to go to the water because it instantly just calms me down. Surfing, going to the gym. Great, Kevin. Those are great ideas. Going to the gym and physical activity can be really helpful. That has a dual effect of also working on like the physical wellness part about it as well, not only just the mental aspect. Thank you for sharing. If anyone else wants to share, you can do so in the chat and we'll talk about it. Okay. So creating a nourishing and healthy routine is another way of enhancing those wellness skills. So when change comes in and disrupts our lives, developing a routine can help provide some sense of comfort and familiarity. So when change is happening, usually our routine is completely messed up. There's no rhyme or reason. Everything just feels like it's just, like I said, flying around us and it's a bunch of moving parts and we can't grasp them. So having a routine or trying to carve out a routine for yourself during these times of change can be really helpful. It's important to remember flexibility and to not be super rigid on yourself in order to be better equipped for possible future change, and also to not get into the cycle of beating yourself up for not sticking to the routine or things like that. But having or trying to have a routine can just be helpful to add a sense of structure and comfort, like I said, and familiarity. So if you can think about what the routine you had was before the change, start to think about what are the effects of the change on your routine. How did your routine change because of the change you're going through? Both negative and positive. So maybe the change actually promoted more routine and more structure, which is great. And maybe that's a bad thing, right? Maybe you're used to having more flexibility, and because of the change now you have less flexibility, and that's something that you dislike. So it could be one or the other. What does or could your new routine look like? Could you add a morning routine? Could you add in maybe more set meal structure? If for those of us who may be working at home, sometimes it's really hard to shut off. So maybe it's about just leaving your computer in one room and not looking at it after 5 o'clock if you have the option to. Maybe it's about putting your phone away or limiting notifications, right? There's just certain things that we can do to help ourselves during change, and kind of looking at that and looking at ways that we can create a new routine for ourselves. So when we're thinking of making a new routine, we also have to think about, okay, well, how is this going to increase my wellness? Creating a routine just for the sake of it isn't really going to be all that helpful. It has to have some sort of personal connection to you. There has to be a motivator there. So if you can recognize, okay, this change that's going on is really overwhelming. Maybe a routine would be helpful for me, but what is it about the routine that's going to help me feel better? So recognizing how it's going to contribute to your overall wellness is really important. So you may want to consider, when thinking about a routine, some of the following areas. So quality sleep, some sort of movement, laughter, including relaxation, which I think a lot of us forget to include in our routines, if I'm honest. That go, go, go mentality is really easy to fall into. And again, especially working from home, if people are doing so right now, it is really challenging to shut off, and it kind of can feel like I'm always working. So it's important to really schedule in, if you're bad at relaxing and taking that time for yourself, schedule it in, put it in your routine. Things like sexual health, healthy eating, and other forms of self-care are all really important to consider when you're thinking about creating a routine, especially in the face of change. So does anyone want to share some of the ways that they could create change in their routines to promote wellness for themselves? As I was talking, did anything pop up for people? Did anything come to mind about ways that they could change their routine, or maybe a routine that they have that's really helpful that they want to share? Again, I will share for myself. I find that having a good morning routine for me is really helpful and helps to kind of start my day on the right path. So things like meditating first thing, maybe journaling or reading. And I find limiting my time on my phone first thing in the morning and also right before bed, it can be really helpful. It just helps to disconnect my brain and just kind of focus on, okay, now is the time to just be with myself and just relax maybe before bed, or when I first get up, it's like, okay, I just want to set my intentions for the day and just be quiet with myself first before I jump into the hustle bustle. So things like that could be really helpful for your routine as well. And even thinking about, yeah, what do I want to do during the day to have more structure if I need it? Or maybe you're somebody who wants less structure, and how can you achieve that in a productive way as well? So it can actually be really hard to set up these routines, especially when things feel overwhelming or a lot of changes happening at once. It can be really hard to stick to routines or commit to self-care when things are changing and when we feel overwhelmed. It can feel like doing the things that we know will make us feel better takes so much energy and so much time. And like I said earlier, especially when change is happening, we're kind of very goal focused, like we just want to fix it and have a solution or an end point from the change. And so sometimes everything else falls to the wayside. And so we know that, hey, if I go to the gym today, it's going to make me feel better, but I don't have time, or oh, I just don't have the energy for it, right? Those kind of the things that we say to ourselves in those ways are also keeping us in that feeling of overwhelm. And sometimes it's just about getting over that kind of anticipation, right? If you just do it, if you just get there, get to the gym, go get to the park so you can go for a walk, get out your yoga mat, kind of set yourself up to start doing some sort of art or craft, right? Just getting set up is the worst part. Once you get going, you'll actually enjoy yourself and come down from the maybe high of the stress. But it's just about getting there and starting. That can be the most tricky part. It's really important when you think about setting up a routine to just be kind to yourself, that it's normal to struggle with routine in the face of change. It's normal to feel that lack of energy and to feel like I don't have time, I don't have the energy. It just feels like so much work, like I have so much on my plate, I can't do it. That is a normal feeling. But it's also important to recognize, again, that by using these things, by being like, I don't have the time, I don't have time to take care of myself, I don't have time to eat a proper lunch, I don't have time to meditate or do the thing that makes me feel good, I don't feel like it, I'll do it tomorrow. All of these things that we say to ourselves about not doing the things that are helpful for us are actually just keeping us feeling that sense of overwhelm. And in the face of change, it actually keeps us down instead of helping us move forward and move through it and help us process and problem solve and work through it. So yes, those are valid excuses. I don't have the time, I don't have the energy, of course. But sometimes we have to push past those things as well and recognize when it's just a limiting thing. And just try our best to do things that help us, because I think forget that when we reward ourselves, we will be more productive. So if you're punishing yourself by I can't go to the gym until I do XYZ, well, yes, it may work, but it's also setting up the precedent that you're punishing yourself to get something that you want or get something that makes you feel good. Whereas it might be more helpful the gym, then I will do XYZ, because you're rewarding yourself and then you're feeling more productive, better about yourself, and all of those things. So it has a ripple effect. So just something to think about. So next we're going to talk about those nurturing skills. So taking time to slow down and to tend to our needs is an important part of maintaining physical and mental health. So if growing up, your needs were consistently not met or were inconsistently met, so maybe your needs were met one time and then other times they weren't, and it was just, you didn't know when it was going to be met or not. We experience parentification, or we were taught that we need to care for others in order to be praised or nurtured. We were never really taught how to show care to ourselves. So self-nurturing can feel unnatural at first. This is because of the adversity that you faced or the environment that you were raised in, right? It can oftentimes, I hear a lot of people talk about how, well, I always care for other people, or I was always paying attention to or nurturing or caring for others. So I never really spent any time on myself, which it's a nice thing. It's great that you're a caregiver in that way and that you have that empathy and love towards other people. However, if it happens at the sacrifice of yourself, is that really helpful for you? Is it serving you to be like that, or is it a disservice to your own well-being to do that? Noticing any negative critical thoughts and replacing them with kinder, more compassionate thoughts can help us approach self-nurturing in a more effective way. So what we talked about earlier about that cognitive piece, right? If we recognize that we're often really hard on ourselves, that we're our own worst critic, that we're constantly critiquing or judging or monitoring ourselves all the time, it can be really damaging. It can be a lot of effort and draining our energy. And so it might be really helpful to start tuning into those things and being like, how can I be more kind to myself? How can I offer myself more grace and more compassion about the things that I'm doing and the things that are happening around me? Can I, instead of self-blame, can I offer myself self-compassion? And this can actually really change how you view all of the situations in your life. Because if you're, oftentimes I like to think of it like, if you're thinking to yourself that you're not enough, say that's the belief that you have. So thinking that you're not enough, every scenario in your life that happens, there's always going to be a problem, right? Because I'm not enough to deserve those scenarios, because that's my belief that I have. So if I change my belief or start to shift it to say, well, I am enough, who I am is as I am is enough, then maybe the scenarios around me will start to seem better because I believe in myself and I believe that I am enough for those things. So tuning into those things can be really helpful, and just start to recognize some of that self-critical talk if you have it. So part of being self-compassionate involves being able to understand that the thoughts and the feelings that you're experiencing are normal and part of the human experience. We all struggle to cope with change. We all recognize that it's hard. Pain and suffering is a universal human experience, right? Sometimes we can get caught up in this, I guess, the culture of kind of toxic positivity, like I call it, and that you got to be positive and just look on the bright side and things will turn around and all of that stuff. And it can make you feel like if you're having a bad day, if you're going through a hard time, that's inappropriate or you shouldn't be feeling that way. And in reality, all that's doing is invalidating your experiences, when in reality, that's a normal part of being human, is to struggle sometimes and to go through periods of change and to maybe have a hard time dealing with that. That's a normal thing. So meeting our difficult thoughts and our emotions with kindness can actually help us slow down, help us relax, and be able to connect with our deeper needs. So if we continuously invalidate ourselves and tell ourselves that our feelings are not worthy or valid, that can cause problems. That can cause us to feel even worse about the situation that we're going through, instead of acknowledging, hey, this change is really hard. I'm struggling right now. I'm having a hard time and I need some help with that. So by connecting to that, it can actually lessen the effect of the feelings happening in your body. So thinking about ways that you can slow down your life, so that you can fully experience the change and provide time for you to process what has happened and plan for the future. What might slowing down look like in different areas of your life? How can you incorporate slowing down? What would that mean for you? How much slowing down is necessary, or how much, I guess, slowing down would not be helpful? So kind of gauging the amount there. How can you relax a bit and give yourself more of an opportunity to feel and process the change? Sometimes when we're in the midst of change and when that stress is there and that kind of anxiety around it happens, we push through it and we don't really focus on what's happening and we don't process through the change. So how can we tune in and recognize, okay, I'm going through this change. I need to focus on that and acknowledge that I'm feeling certain types of ways about it. And I need to give myself space for that. So think about what it might look like in areas of your life like work, home, friends, and other relationships in your life. Reaching out and connecting with others can be a really powerful way of nurturing and caring for yourself. So a support system is really important. When you're experiencing a huge change, talking with people you trust can really help feel less disconnected and less alone in that change or that overwhelm. Sometimes a support system of people can help you work through your thoughts or your feelings. They may be able to offer you advice or suggestions. And other times it's really just helpful to have somebody who's going to listen and support you. So if you need to vent or you need to cry, sometimes it's just helpful to know who to turn to for those things. So by knowing what you're looking for, it can be helpful to clarify that to the person you're seeking support from. So oftentimes, I don't know if anyone's experienced this, but when we kind of open up to somebody, usually the first thing that happens is that they will jump into problem solving or solution focused stuff. They'll be like, you should try this, or when I was going through this, I tried this and it really helped. And it's coming from a great place. They mean so well and they're trying to help. But sometimes if all you're looking for is the support and the listening, if you don't clarify that with the person, you can fall into the advice giving, and then you end up feeling unheard in that conversation, and that doesn't help you. So if what you're looking for from your support system is just to listen and just to hear you out, kind of say that in the beginning, like, oh, I just need to vent, I just need you to listen, and kind of, I don't need advice or anything, like I just need to talk and feel listened to. That can really set the stage for you to get what you need from the people around you. It's simple, but it is a really effective tool. So it is also important to think about the people you might include in your support system and in what ways. So maybe you have a friend who seems to always offer really great advice, a family member who's kind of always down to have a fun activity or to engage in certain things, or maybe there's a spiritual leader in your community who has a great ear for listening. So who can you pull into your kind of inner circle right now during times of change to support those things and for you to feel more comfortable and more supported in all of it? So caring for and nurturing ourselves is about regular, consistent, and daily acts of kindness towards ourselves. Self-nurturing is important in the beginning and about maintaining a loving relationship with ourselves. So think about some of the things that you do on a daily basis that help you feel cared for and nurtured. Maybe think about ways you felt nurtured in the past. And if nothing comes to mind now, that's okay. But are there any of these things that you would like to start implementing regularly? Anything that we've mentioned so far, can you incorporate that into your daily, consistent, regular practice of self-kindness? It is a practice. It's not something that you can just start doing and decide and it just happens. It is something that in the beginning has to be a consistent, constant, I guess, conscious effort to do. Because like we talked about earlier, that negativity bias tends to put us in the self-criticism phase more frequently. So thinking about all of the ways that you can nurture and soothe yourself. See if you can prioritize these things and pick maybe top 5 things. Maybe it's like, I love to take a bath. I want to get outside more. I want to start maybe eating at least 1 meal a day that is really healthy and full of vegetables. Just different things that you can think of that would be really nurturing for you. What can you do and how can you incorporate those into your daily routine? And then also including the frequency of that. So how often would I like to engage in these activities? And then how do you plan on starting this new routine or this new incorporation of things into your life? So now we're going into that last phase, which is the action skills. So taking action is the goal-oriented positive steps that we have towards change and towards acceptance of the change. So if you're unsure about what would be helpful or what is even unhelpful, think about some of the changes that you've experienced in your past. How did you manage to deal with it? And what were you able to do to help yourself during the coping process? We're going to go through a series of questions and I'd like you to take some time to reflect on and even jot down your answers. So the first question here is, what was one big change you have experienced in the last year or two? Think about that. What pops to your mind first? So how did you first approach this change? Did you get completely overwhelmed by it and kind of shut down? Did you avoid the problem? Did you kind of go to it head on and were really motivated to try and help it and change and kind of figure it out, and then ended up burnt out? Or did you kind of approach it with a very balanced view and you just kind of took one day at a time and took things as it came and just problem solved and helped yourself through it? So what did you do or did you not do in the face of these big changes? And after a while, how did that change? So how did coping with the change shift and change or evolve as it progressed and as you went through the change? If we consider your current circumstances, what are some actions you have been able to put in place before that might be helpful for the change you may be going through now? Can we pull on some of those strengths or skills that you used in the past to help yourself now? And can we incorporate that now, starting today, moving forward? You're very capable of coping with change. You've done it, right? You're here. You've gone through changes before, and you've seen it out. You've seen the other side of it. You're here, so you have been able to cope with it. So maybe think about, what did I do well during that change? How did I give myself the nurturing? How did I focus on my wellness? What kind of thoughts were I having? And think about the strengths that you have and pull on those things, because you have made it through change before. So this isn't a new thing, it's a new type of change, but going through change itself is a regular part of our human experience. So taking action can feel difficult, but even the smallest forward moving step is still a success. So like I said earlier, sometimes it's just the anticipation of starting that can be really hard. But once you get into the action phase of it, we actually realize, oh, okay, this wasn't as bad as I thought. So sometimes, like Katie suggests, thinking about it or contemplating the change for a while can be helpful, and then you kind of go straight forward to it. That's a really good way of looking at it. I wonder, would it have been helpful to, instead of contemplating it for such a long period of time, did you notice that maybe there were some things that were limiting you or keeping you stuck in that 2-year phase, instead of being able to maybe shorten that gap? Not to say that there's anything wrong with thinking about something for 2 years, but maybe sometimes there's time sensitive changes that happen, and maybe we need to make more, I guess, short-term changes that are happening. So yeah, is there a way that you can maybe reflect on that experience and what you did well and what you maybe struggled with, and kind of moving forward have a different perspective and different way to look at the next change that you go through? So another option would be to try something new. So sometimes beginning a new project can actually take your mind off of the changes you've been going through or are currently going through. So change is not just about learning to get rid of the old or let go of it, but it's also about opening ourselves up to new possibilities. So think about potential projects that you might like to begin during this period. See if you can maybe list 5 things that would be interesting to you. Something like creating a vision board, learning to play some sort of an instrument, volunteering at a local nonprofit or volunteer center, learning how to make homemade pasta. What is something that you can do that's always interested you, but you maybe have never taken the time to give yourself space to try? And how can you do that for yourself? So once you have a few options, you can kind of decide on which ones sound the most appealing to you. But it is important to think about and to start thinking about, how do I kind of spur myself on to kind of be open to new opportunities? Because with change comes a lot of loss as well. Oftentimes we struggle to change, or we struggle to accept change because it means I have to give up something. I have to lose something in order to gain what I want. So it's the old, or I guess what you're losing, quote unquote losing, is usually comfortable. It's familiar, it's safe. So sometimes it's hard to let go of that, and that's okay too. But sometimes when we get stuck in that sense of like, I don't want to let go of the old stuff because I'm afraid of what's coming up, I don't know what's going to happen, it can be really helpful to try something new, to open yourself up to the possibility of saying like, Just because I don't know what's going to happen and I don't know how to do something, I can still try it. And sometimes the outcome turns out really great, like making homemade pasta for the first time. So things to ask yourself would be, why did you choose this project? Say you decide, I'm going to go with the homemade pasta analogy or metaphor there. So say you decide to, you're just like, I'm going to try to make homemade pasta. Why did you choose this project? What's the meaning that it has for you? What would you like to accomplish by making homemade pasta? Is it because it's something you've never done and it might make you feel good about yourself? Is it because you love food and this is something that's going to be enjoyable and make you feel good? So really understand what the intention is behind it. What do you need to do to make this happen? Is it just as simple as watching a YouTube video or getting a recipe and going to the grocery store and getting all the ingredients? Or does it take a little bit more time with maybe a bigger project? And are there any potential barriers that might get in the way of some of these things or being able to start the work on the project? And what are some ways of helping to prevent or to work through these barriers? So just some questions to reflect on. And again, just kind of figuring out what is my intention with starting this new project and how can it be helpful for me? So understanding and accepting that there is much in life that we do not have control over can help people to adapt well to change. So in moments when we feel there's a lack of control, especially when it comes to big life changes, it's important to look for things that you do have influence over and to take action that is aligned with your values and your goals. Thinking about current or past change, what are some areas or aspects of it that you do have influence over? What do you have control over right now? What did you have control over in a past change? Right? It's never helpful to focus on or to dwell on the things that we don't have control over, because we're setting ourselves up for failure there, because we're not able to manipulate that. We're not able to control it. So it's not going to be helpful. What actions have you taken already or could you take in the future? And what are things that you did not or do not have control over? And how can you start to accept that you don't have control over it? So now we're going to shift a little bit into thinking about our attitudes about change and how these can be helpful or unhelpful in regard to coping with change and ways we can work on shifting these perspectives. So to deal with change in the present and in the future more optimally, developing both your skills and attitudes towards change is beneficial and protective in the long run. So these attitudes and skills include thinking about change in new ways, setting constructive goals, finding meaning and purpose, and developing effective problem-solving skills and strategies. So on the screen here, we have another little scale. So again, you can kind of go through this on your own, or we can also, we can go through it now. And like I said, it's in your workbook, so you have it. So like I said, just circle yes or no and kind of jot down the number that's associated to the yes or the no. So when it comes to changing my life, I feel it is not a normal part of life. I believe it's not a good thing. I blame others for what is happening. I view change as a hurdle to jump to get where I want to go. I am not a worrier. I rarely feel powerless. I enjoy a good challenge. I get anxious and depressed. I refuse to let change disrupt my life. I tend to think the worst first. I do not panic when I encounter change. My self-talk usually goes to why me. I have supportive people in my life who help me. I can control it. Life is not fair. I feel like there is no good solution. I get scared. I envision ways I can grow from it. I see it as a challenge. I feel unlucky. I manage the stress associated with it. I think that this happens to me only. So remember to not overthink the answers either. Whatever comes to mind, and just trust that. So then you're going to tally up all of the numbers that you have. And so on here, obviously you can see that if you scored low, it means you lack sufficient attitudes and skills to cope with change effectively. If you scored 8 to 14, it's a moderate score, so it means you have sufficient attitudes and skills to cope with change effectively, but you can improve on those things. And then 15 to 22, so if you scored high, it means that you have attitudes and skills to cope effectively with change. So in order to work through change positively and efficiently, developing and strengthening some specific skills and attitudes can be more helpful than others. This scale was created as a way to measure your expertise in skills and attitudes related to positive change and to offer guidance towards the areas that may benefit from enhanced skills and attitude development. So add up the total number, like I said, of your circled responses and see where you score. And like I said, this is in your workbook, so you can do it afterwards as well. So as mentioned in the ways to cope with change in the first webinar, and also we talked about this a little bit today as well. So taking action is an essential skill to cultivate in order to most effectively deal with change. So developing a plan can help bring clarity and direction to your action. It can help give guidance and support for individuals ready to move from the stage of preparing to make change and into actively taking steps towards their desired future. So consider the things that motivate you the most. A motive is defined as a need or desire that causes a person to take action. So in saying that, what motivates you? What is it that you tend to find yourself, that gives you motivation? If I'm honest with myself, sometimes if I'm having a long day, I'm like, okay, I know I'm going to plan my dinner and I'm going to make it really tasty because food motivates me. So what is it that motivates you? So what is motivating you to cope with change, and can this be used to help give clearer direction and intention for your action plan? Are you motivated by self-improvement, by money, by encouragement by someone you respect, by getting positive results, the feeling of accomplishment, feeling proud of yourself, feeling success? Are you motivated by family or trying something new? So maybe food isn't really a helpful one, but it is what it is. Decide what it is for you that motivates you and kind of pushes you forward, and let this be kind of the beacon of light for you. In creating an action plan, try including the following prompts. So things like, my current or future change is, and fill in the blank. First, I need to, fill in the blank. Next, I will, fill in the blank. I can minimize my stress by, who can help me plan? I want the results to be, I am able to choose, I can help make a positive result more likely by. So these are all some of the things that we can start to reflect on and to think about in terms of creating a plan or an action, some sort of action oriented thing. So being proactive and taking charge can help you feel more empowered and confident in your ability to be able to successfully cope with change. Instead of ruminating on the past or focusing on the worst case scenario that could happen, what are the ways of viewing the situation that could be more motivating and proactive? So consider your current or future change. Was this your choice? Is the change that you're going through something that you chose for yourself? How do you feel about it? And be honest with yourself. What would you like to get out of your new situation? How will you be proactive to make it happen? And how do you think you will grow from this change? So even if it's not going the way that you want, there is usually a lesson or some sort of growth that you can get from it, whether it just be like, I would never do it this way again. That's still a learning, right? You still got something out of it in the sense of, you know now that you will not do that again. Right? So there's always, I guess I always try and prompt people to try at least, and not to invalidate your feelings, and not to say that the way that you're feeling about it, if it didn't go well, is wrong, but just to say, yes, it didn't go well. Yes, it's hard. Yes, I'm struggling, but what did I learn from it? What did I, even when it's bad, what did I gain from this experience? And that's part of kind of shifting that attitude a little bit about change. So an attitude is your mental outlook on something. So going through change and transition can stir up a variety of thoughts and emotions. Many of these negative thoughts or emotions can influence our attitude, and if we cling to them, they will influence our attitude in a negative way. When we focus on the negative and we ignore the positive, or even the neutral, because that's also a possibility as well, it becomes harder to see outside of a problem-saturated outlook. When acknowledging that change can be hard and a source of uncertainty and stress, what are some ways that you can help your situation by intentionally shifting your attitude and the way you approach your situation? So check off any of the statements that feel doable for you. So we have remain positive when talking about it. Reach out to a supportive person. Be proud of small steps. Give myself a reward for each step. Not say this will never work. Forget about other unsuccessful changes. Take deep breaths. Keep inspiring quotes nearby. Post them up around your house. Don't minimize the change. Remember that you do not need to be perfect. Focus on taking care of your body. Not exaggerate the issue. So it's a fine line between minimizing it and exaggerating. Meditate and engage in other relaxation techniques. Express yourself. Use a positive self-talk. Talk to someone who listens well. Seek spiritual support, or keep a sense of humor. So these are all different options that you can use in the face of trying to shift your attitude. And it's important to pick things that you feel are realistic for you, that you feel would work, and that you feel confident that you can engage with regularly. So it's not helpful to say you decide to meditate for 20 minutes a day. Is that realistic for you? Is that something that you've already done before and you've recognized the help in that? Or is this completely new to you? And maybe that's an unrealistic goal to set for yourself at the moment, right? Can you maybe meditate for 5 minutes a day? And then there's also room there to add in some other coping skills. So there's always opportunity to expand beyond just this little list here. So Cindy, there is a way to access the presentation. I believe it will be posted on the CMHA of New Brunswick's YouTube page, but we can double check that as well. So thinking about these different options, or maybe even some that you have already on your own that you thought of, it might be helpful to decide on 3 main ones that you're willing to put your energy on. Like I said, it has to make sense for you and it has to be relevant to your life and not be unrealistic. And then again, describe examples of how you might decide to refocus and shift your attitude in each of these scenarios. So if, say, self-critical talk comes up a lot and you decide, okay, I want to use more positive self-talk, what does that look like? What do I have to do to help support myself in making that change? Right. So as we were talking about, and a lot of our focus has been on this idea of those negative beliefs that we carry, often these are a lot deeper rooted beliefs that we've either been taught, whether explicitly or implicitly, by our families, by our society, by school, or major experiences in our lives. So these can be shaped by adversities as well. And these influence our perception of any situation we enter into. So when it comes to change, our negative beliefs can be activated and may hold us back from being able to successfully move forward and cope with the change, because those beliefs pop up and immediately we're telling ourselves we can't do it because that belief is there and it's really strong. Some of the negative beliefs that are most powerful and could have the greatest effects are: these kind of things only happen to me, I'm a failure, I can't win, life is unfair, I'll never be happy again, if I ignore it, it will not happen, this is the worst thing that can happen to me. Along with I'm a failure, oftentimes I'm a failure and I'm not enough are 2 very big ones, and usually those are very prominent and really strong. So check in with yourself. Like, do you have some of these thoughts? Do you say these to yourselves often? And if you do, then maybe you would benefit from looking at your beliefs a little bit more closely. Figure out where they came from. Why do you have these beliefs? Whose voice is that? Because usually our beliefs come from the voices of other people and not necessarily from ourselves. And how can we look at that more closely? So reframing those negative beliefs can actually help us look at our situations from a new and more balanced perspective. It can help shift our attitude and broaden our outlook on the change. An example of a reframe for the negative thought of these kinds of things only happen to me would be to be more balanced and more kind and recognize that everyone experiences some kind of change in their life. So just kind of counterbalancing those negative self-beliefs with a more balanced, positive, opposite belief. So what are some of your negative beliefs that are being carried into your current or future situation? So if in the past you've quote unquote failed at something or made a mistake that didn't turn out well, are you carrying that into a new change? Are you focusing on, okay, well, last time this didn't work, so of course maybe this time it won't work either? Recognizing these things, become aware of the way that you're talking or thinking about the change. And how can you potentially reframe that? Can you offer yourself a more balanced outlook on it and shift your attitude to look at the change or the transition in a more balanced perspective? Change can be really scary, as we've talked about. It uproots us, it creates a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety. Sometimes the most difficult thing that we deal with. It can be a loss, whether that be of purpose or meaning. It can be a loss of people in our lives. It can be a loss of a job potentially. It can be loss of friends, family, a place. Like it embodies loss. Change is very, very closely related to loss. However, change can also mean the start of a new journey, or even renewing old passions and purpose. So yes, there is a lot of loss associated, but like we've been talking about, it is also an opportunity for new things and new possibilities. So we have to let go of one thing to gain something different. Some of the questions to consider here are, what are the passions that you had in the past that maybe you would like to renew in this time of change? Focusing on your strengths, right? How did I cope well with the last change? How did I make it through another previous hard experience? And how can I do that for myself now? What new interests could I grow into passions? Might I be interested in developing? So maybe you're taking this opportunity of change to completely transform something or invest in a new experience. Recognize what obstacles that could be keeping me from pursuing the passions that I'm having, right? So what are some of the barriers there? And are they realistic barriers, or are they unrealistic barriers that are coming from self-limiting beliefs that we have? And how can we overcome those obstacles? Do we need to shift our perspective? Do we need to look at our negative beliefs? Do we need to just figure it out? Is it a money thing? And if it's financial, can I save for this thing? So just recognizing what the obstacles are and how to kind of overcome those. So looking at the future can be really hard when the present is so up in the air. Like I said, sometimes when change is happening, we get a kind of a short-term vision, and it's really hard to take a look at the broader perspective in the long term. Sometimes we get so caught up in the change that we don't have the ability to see ahead and recognize that these feelings in this situation is temporary. It can be helpful to look at the future and take time to reflect on what you hope for in the future, even if you have no idea how you're going to get there in this moment. It's not about how am I going to get there. It's just about looking ahead and saying, this is what I want. This is what I hope for down the line. You don't have to know how that's going to happen, and you don't have to recognize, okay, well, I need to do this, this, and this to get there. Right now, it's just about looking at it. What can I hope for? And writing these things down can actually help us gain perspective about it. And maybe on paper, these goals for the future won't seem as difficult to achieve as they may in our heads, which is a funny thing, but it does offer a different perspective when you write it out. Thank you for pointing out the typo, Cynthia. We'll have to change that for the future. Perhaps setting a timeline for yourself in terms of achieving this goal is important. And what would you like to accomplish within the next week, the next month, the next year? So if you can only think towards the next week, that's okay. If thinking about the next year is too much, how do we pull it back a little bit and just how can I think, what's the goal for myself for the next week? What do I want to accomplish within the week? It is important when goal setting to make sure that the goals are realistic, they're achievable, and they're measurable. Sometimes we can have expectations of ourselves, whether that's learned from our family system, from school, or from ourselves. And these expectations can be way too high or way too unrealistic, and they can actually set us up for failure. So assess your goals, assess what your expectations are of yourself in being able to achieve this goal. And is it realistic? And if it's not, can I alter this goal a little bit to be more realistic? If my goal is, I don't know, this is a big one, to write a book within the next year, right? How am I going to, if I look at that and I say, holy crap, I have to write like 350 pages within the next year, how am I going to do that? What kind of ideas am I going to have? Can I pull back? And can I make smaller, achievable goals over the course of the year to set myself up for success? And how will you measure the success of your goal? So setting up measurable things to track the success that you're having. This is also where compassion and self-kindness come in as well. So giving yourself more grace if things don't go to plan, and can we create space for things that don't go to plan? If we are somebody who tends to be a planner, can we also plan for the unexpected? Can we allow space for things that we don't anticipate? Can we give ourselves kindness if we don't achieve or don't succeed? Can we take a broader view of the situation and recognize barriers and maybe also recognize external factors that influence maybe the effect that we didn't succeed, that we failed, that affected the outcome? So rather than kind of falling into that self-blame and only looking at ourselves and looking at and seeing what we did wrong, can we take a balanced perspective and also recognize things that were happening outside of us that were not in our control that affected the outcome as well? So it's not always helpful. We can easily fall into that self-blame when things don't go well, and we can focus on, well, I could have done this or I should have done that. When you say I could have or I should have, those are two signals to say that maybe you're looking at that from maybe a too self-critical place, right? Yes, you could have done X, Y, Z, but in the moment you were operating from exactly the place that you needed to with the information that you had. Now that you're outside of it and you have other information, you would have made another choice. But in the moment, you were operating from the information that you had and you didn't know any better. So offer yourself some compassion and some kindness about those things. So when we grow from change and we're successful in being able to cope with change, we will come out the other side of that experience with a new perspective and more tools and skills to equip us for the next time we have to face change. Because let's be honest, change is inevitable and we're always going to go through changes in life, and being able to cope with those things and manage those things to the best of our ability is only going to help us as we move forward and approach the next change that comes along. All right. So it has been a pleasure sharing this with you guys today on coping with change, and we hope that you learned something or some new skills and something to think about and maybe reflect on further. You're welcome to ask any questions. I'll be here for the next 15 minutes if people have questions to ask. Alternately, you can also connect with our supervisor, Kayla, who you may have already met in other webinars, if you have any questions in the days following. So her email is on the website there, I believe. Sorry, not on the website, on the PowerPoint. Or you can visit our website as well. And please connect with us through our website, through Instagram, through Facebook, and also connect with CMHA as well, as they have a lot of webinars and things like that available on their Facebook page and their Instagrams and things like that. But it was really great getting to share this with you guys. Have a mindful day, and thank you. And like I said, I'm available for questions if anyone has any, but otherwise you are free to go.